I'm Pastor Bob Glaze, here to welcome our listeners to another Watchman on the Wall broadcast. On today's program, Pastor Larry Spargimino will be interviewing author Doug Woodward and his contribution to the book Revising Reality, a biblical look into the cosmos. Learn about dramatic new discoveries in biblical text and breakthroughs in modern physics that are changing views on the cosmos. Here now is Brother Larry and Doug Woodward.
Thank you so much, Bob, and greetings to each and every one of our listeners. Southwest Radio Church, we are certainly loving the Lord and loving the Word of God and loving prophecy. And you know, friends, when you love all those things, God begins to take you on an adventure. I've often said that the Christian life is the greatest adventure you could ever find. A lot of times young people tell me, well, if I become a Christian, it'll be really blah, it'll be dull. No way, Jose. Well, one of the great prophetic scholars, and I really mean that, whom we've gotten to know and to love and to esteem, is S. Douglas Woodward. He does stuff that is on the cutting edge. It's groundbreaking, it's insightful, but it's extremely biblical and starts pulling things together that we've never seen and never known. But when you read his stuff, when you look to the scriptures, when you pray to the Lord for guidance, you say, aha, I see it. Well, he is part of a big project. There are actually 4 authors. Doug is one of the authors, and there's a new book out. It's titled Revising Reality, a biblical look into the cosmos, and this is volume 1. And one of your favorite and one of my favorite prophetic authors, Paul McGuire, says this about the book, and I think this will get us started. From the unbridled quest to exploit quantum science to engaging supernatural entities, a mind-blowing expose of the cosmos. I haven't read the whole book. It's just too meaty for me to finish in a few days. But from what I have read, what Paul McGuire says about the book is absolutely true. Brother Doug, thank you so much for being with us.
It's always great to be with you, Larry. Always enjoy the conversation.
I'm looking at the title, Revising Reality. When I first saw that title, I kind of chuckled. I said, now what? Because reality is something like terra firma. Well, this is the way it is. You don't revise it, or do you? So, Douglas, tell us about the title, Revising Reality, and also about the subtitle. We'll probably want to spend several minutes on the subtitle, How Dramatic New Discoveries in Biblical Text and Breakthroughs in Modern Physics are transforming our view of the cosmos. So let's talk about revising reality.
Right. Well, you know, there's many aspects. It's a title that a lot of my titles are like this, that they have a number of different sort of meanings. You have to sort of understand each of those to get a good picture of the overall idea. But it really begins with the notion that we all have been, I use the word, and I think it's basically true, brainwashed. We've all been brainwashed in the education that we've gotten, the TV shows that we watch, the movies that we see, and we have been, taught things like the Big Bang Theory, the ever-expanding universe, the universe eventually dying a cold death and entropy when it basically all the stars and galaxies move so far apart from one another that, essentially they're in isolation. We've been taught evolution. We've been taught all of these things. Now, some people, a lot of your audience probably are like me. They're a little older. I'm in my 60s. We remember Carl Sagan. We remember the 1980 TV show Cosmos. It was the most popular and still remains worldwide the most popular public television show of all time. And Cosmos is, though, basically a statement of belief about the nature of the universe from an atheistic perspective. And while it's a wonderful program, and Carl Sagan really was a wonderful man, there's no question he was an atheist. He didn't believe in God and didn't believe in the creation and may have believed in extraterrestrials, certainly was curious about whether or not there was life out there. And so this is sort of the school of thought that we all grew up in, were educated in, the TV shows that we watch, current day shows like Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, all these kinds of shows, they educate us, they brainwash us, into believing in a universe that God did not create. And as Carl Sagan says, he says, the cosmos is all that was, ever was, is, or ever will be. And of course, as Christians, we believe the cosmos was created by God. The cosmos as it is today is almost a parenthetical comment. Before was eternity, afterward will be eternity. The Bible, of course, we argue, is a cosmos or a cosmological book. It begins talking about the creation of the heaven and the earth, the creation of humankind, and it ends with a very new cosmos, the New Jerusalem, coming to be the dwelling place for believers. So we make the statement the Bible is a cosmological book, and the story is one that's placed in the context of the cosmos.
Well, you quote Carl Sagan, and you explain some of it, where he puts his hope in the awe that we feel when we look at the universe, like, oh, wow. But when I look at that, and I've read some of his writings, it seems like if that's the best we can do, we have good reason to be filled with despair. Maybe we all need to go to some mountaintop and get high on pot or peyote or whatever else. I mean, I can see
there's no hope if that's all that there is.
Yeah, and in fact, the book makes a statement. It's on page 16. I think it's so wonderful. We matter because we matter to God. If you don't see that, if you don't understand that, you will be filled with despair.
That's right. I had kind of a philosophy education in my college days and studied a big word called existentialism, which was a big sort of dominant philosophy that kind of grew out of World War II, very despairing, point of view. As I say in the book, that, Carl Sagan looks at the cosmos, looks at these beautiful pictures of Orion or of these nebulas or of these galaxies, and he says, wow, isn't that beautiful? Isn't it great that we're all just a part of this cosmos? And an existentialist like a Jean-Paul Sartre would look at it and say, isn't it despairing that there's no meaning? Humanity is a small little creature of insignificance. Essentially, that's what Sagan says, too. He says that we're on a tiny planet orbiting an average sun. We're on the outside of a Milky Way galaxy that billions, of course, he used to say this, billions and billions, one of billions and billions of galaxies. And so the emphasis is on man's insignificance. And of course, I try to say humanity as opposed to man being inclusive. But that's really the biblical statement of the cosmos could not be more opposite. The biblical statement of the cosmos is God created man. In the beginning, he created man. Male and female, he created them. In his image, he created them. The cosmos, as the Bible tells the story, is about the relationship of God the Creator and humankind, who really is his crown of creation. And of course, we sinned. We are in need of redemption. And that of course, sparks another amazing cosmological statement, that the God that created all of these stars and galaxies decided to come to Earth and live as one of us, as a human being, and he died on the cross to redeem us. And so humanity is forever stamped with significance because God created us in his image, and he died for us to redeem us so that he could live and we could live with him in relationship for eternity. That's the Bible's view of the cosmos in a nutshell.
Well, you speak a lot about cosmology, and it's a good term. But when you hear that word cosmology, you say, is that something like what they do with nails or cosmetologists? Tell us what cosmology really is. And does the Bible have a unique cosmology?
Yes. Well, first off, the cosmetology is the word that probably most of the listeners are probably more familiar with than cosmology, and I have some fun with that and some of the things I've written. But that's kind of the way that people are familiar with that word. If you say cosmos, people don't really necessarily know where that's from. It's actually a Greek word. You'll see it spelled Kosmos in the concordances and so forth. And it really is a word for world. But the way cosmos is understood is as an ordered reality, meaning that the universe was not created in chaos, but it was created with some sort of design. So it's one of those ironies that, in effect, an atheist like a Carl Sagan would actually even use the term cosmos, because cosmos conveys design, that there was a great designer that designed the universe. And we believe, and of course others believe as well, I think of the Discovery Institute out where I lived for 20 years in Redmond, Washington, that talks about teleology, which is another Greek word for teleos, or design, that there is a design. In fact, the universe was created in a very specific way so that we can live in it and we can survive in it. And that, as one understands the science, the more you understand, the more you're amazed at just the delicate balance that has to exist of all the different factors. And this is really, again, talking about the nature of the fact that the sinner, really humankind, despite its flaws and its sin, is at the center of God's cosmology.
Well, Douglas, your book gets into all really interesting things as we move beyond cosmology. That's, of course, foundational. But you, in your book, speaks a lot about CERN I believe it's in Geneva. Correct. And you speak about the hidden agenda of CERN. You say CERN, it's a quest to birth a new race of beings. The ultimate objective of CERN concerns spirits, not just physics. Tell us a little bit about the hidden agenda of CERN. First of all, what is CERN?
CERN is this very large ring, 27 kilometers, that's on the border between Switzerland and France, sort of pokes its way over into France as well. It was originally started in 1954, very much involved originally in terms of nuclear research and nuclear technology. Some people just assume that it's really a weapons program. We make this statement, as others have as well, that it really is a modern-day Tower of Babel. We say that for lots of reasons. But CERN is mostly noted as the particle collider, this giant ring that sends particles, in the past protons, around this ring at near the speed of light, and it literally crosses the streams. Remember that in Ghostbusters, if folks saw that movie, we were warned, don't cross the streams. Well, they do intentionally at CERN because they want these particles to collide. And when they collide, they spin off all kinds of strange particles. They were in search of what was called the God particle, the Higgs boson particle. They generate colossal energies in the course of doing these collisions.
Well, would there be a nuclear explosion on the border of Switzerland and France?
In effect, there is a very tiny nuclear explosion that occurs in microseconds. It generates massive amounts of power, but it exists for less than, perhaps a billionth of a second. But that is part of what they're trying to do. They're trying to understand the nature of reality. Now, where it gets sinister is that they also are searching for ways, and this is not conspiracy theory, this is what they say they're trying to do. They are trying to open portals into other universes.
You're talking about stargates, parallel
literally
reality.
Stargates.
Wow.
They are trying to break what's known as the strong force in the universe, the gluon, and I won't go too far into physics here, but basically they're trying to break the gluon, this little tiny, we call them quanta, which quanta or quantum physics means the tiniest particle, the tiniest space that we can conceive of, and that's what the quanta are. We talk about quantum computing and so forth and so on. We get into all of these issues because they ultimately tie into eschatology. They tie into this idea of opening the abyss. And what we believe that they're really attempting to do is to open portals and to look at and open to new dimensions.
Right. Now, there are, you're just touching off a whole bunch of stuff in my brain. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Hopefully good.
Hopefully good. But I'm thinking about Mount Graham in southeastern Arizona. There is actually a Jesuit observatory on top. And I believe it was the Navajo or maybe the Apache were very unhappy with that because
it's a sacred mountain to them.
Yes, and it is a portal, or it seems to have some unusual things going on there.
Right. Well, it does. And of course, there's, in the history of religion, there's always sort of this connection between mountains and the sacred. Even in our Psalms, I shall look up to the mountains. From whence shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord. There's always been this connection about mountains, Mount Sinai, so forth. But Mount Graham, of course, is host to the observatory, this sort of double-barreled stereo telescope that looks into the galaxies. And really, the cosmos, to understand the cosmos today, you have to understand it from, the little phrase I came up with is from the gluons to the galaxies. You've got to understand it from the very, very tiny to the very, very colossal. And but Mount Graham is part of the story, but essentially the CERN issue is opening dimensions, and physicists have warned that the guys that are doing this at CERN, there are 66 nations that are working together. And in fact, the whole world is unified in doing something at CERN to look at other dimensions, discover these particles that are the basis of creation. But ultimately, we think they're trying to open the door for entities to come through. Even Stephen Hawking, who we're familiar with, the physicist that is in a wheelchair that has ALS, even he says, you guys do not know what you're doing. You shouldn't be doing it. You don't know what's going to come through.
Wow. Well, there's a scripture that I do want to read from the book of Revelation. It says, the fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss. And out of the smoke, locusts came down on the earth and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They had as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon, that is, destroyer. So what you're talking about, this could unleash upon the human race an eschatological, tribulational, apocalyptic, of unbelievable proportion.
And we think that the leaders, the people that finance it, the sort of the spiritual gurus behind it, that this is their objective. Ultimately, the objective is to destroy most of the Earth's population and to recreate the world. It is not an accident that the god Shiva, which is the Hindu god of destruction, is the statue that's on the grounds right at headquarters. It is not an accident that this machine, this is the biggest machine that humanity has ever built since the Tower of Babel, and it was built on top of a village that was named after Apollo. It was thought to be built on an old Roman site of an old Roman temple to Apollo. Well, what does Apollo have in common with Shiva? Apollo is the Greek and the Roman god of destruction. And what the belief is that they seek to rebirth, to rebuild the planet and rebirth the human race. But to do so, they must first destroy it. And so it is part of their, you could say, philosophy of religion, that is what, in fact, they're seeking to do. And so it becomes an extremely sinister agenda that they have, and we talk about that, and believe me, we can barely scratch the surface on the level of depth that this whole thing gets into regarding this issue of destroying the world and remaking it, and, in fact, unleashing the powers of the abyss upon this world.
Well, Douglas, it kind of reminds me of, people get all excited about Ebola in West Africa. Those are horrible things, and we certainly don't like police officers or anyone being killed. Then we hear of the magma rising under Yellowstone, 2 or 3 inches under the ground. It's very hot. But what you're telling us, all of these problems that we claim to be facing, global warming, whatever that is, and so that these are really non-problems, that what's being concocted in some of the parts of the earth, these are problems of such a dimension that they are apocalyptic.
Indeed. The ceremonies that we have seen recently in Switzerland, the ceremony at the Gotthard Tunnel in Switzerland, extremely pagan, horrible. I'm sure many of your listeners have seen the videos.
The dancing and the
dancing
weird,
and so forth. Absolutely. They did something similar back in 2015 at CERN itself, the dance of symmetry. And that's one of the things that's so amazing is that these are scientists, intelligent people, and yet they are bringing up all of these pagan rituals. And there's a reason why. We believe, of course, many of the scientists are scientists. They don't have any understanding of the spiritual implications of what's going on. But we believe that those that are leaders in this, that have been behind it from its inception, that they are building the modern Tower of Babel. They are seeking to attack heaven. Anthony Patch, who is the co-author of this book, who is really known as we jokingly call him a CERNologist. And he is on so many radio shows right now, and he is an expert on all of these issues. But he makes a stunning statement. I served as really editor for the entire book and wrote a good deal of it, but I also edited all of the chapters and so forth. And Anthony makes the statement that he believes that the ultimate mission of CERN is to equip the enemies of Christ with cosmic weapons that can be turned against Christ in the second coming. That ultimately that is what they are attempting to do. Sounds outlandish and it sounds crazy, but the deeper you dig into this sort of investigation, the more you realize that there is an incredible spiritual basis to what they are attempting to do. The hidden agenda is absolutely stunning, and we attempt to disclose what that agenda actually is in this book.
Friends, you need this book, Revising Reality. And I'm not joking about it. You need to, if you consider yourself a Christian who's on the cutting edge, if you like prophecy, if you want to understand some of the prophecies of Revelation a little bit better, Revising Reality, a biblical look into the cosmos, Volume 1, is for you. It's the kind of book, friends, that we look at, and we look at some of the topics, and we wonder how much of this stuff is true. How much of this stuff is going on right now? Well, if you look at all the endnotes and the footnotes, and if you look at the videos and go on the YouTube, you'll see it's happening right now. But as I open this program, let me read from Robert Jastrow. It's in the very beginning of the book. It says this, quote, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there." Close quotes. So says Robert Jastrow. Why do I find that statement by Jastrow so magnetic, so compelling? I think it's so true. They think, well, reason is the only thing that exists in the universe. Everything else is a lot of nonsense. But when they climb to the top, the tallest mountain, the theologians, the Bible experts who have been talking about these things for centuries, they're already there. Tell us why that is so true.
Well, I think what happens is as the scientist begins to probe and to explore, whether we're talking at the tiniest level, the quanta level, or the quantum level, we're talking about the mysteries of space-time, galaxies, and so forth. Scientists begin to have a reverence for the mysteries. As much as they learn, as much as they know, they still understand there's a great mystery. There's so much more that they don't know. And as they make discoveries, they begin to realize that the nature of reality It is as a spirit, and there's something that transcends what it is that they can see and so forth. It's one of the great facts of science that, as smart as they claim to be, they essentially say today that 96% of the universe cannot be detected by us or our instruments. That's their point of view. Now, I may not personally agree with that, but it causes scientists to begin to realize there's limits to what they can know.
Well, that is a good explanation. Limits to what they can know. In fact, I've been reading Michael Heiser.
Oh, indeed.
Oh, wow. What a great... I'm going to try to get him on one of these days, but speaking about the hidden world, it's very, very
real.
The
unseen realm. We, in fact, spend some time with Michael's material and have a chapter in the book really dedicated to the research and work that he's done, because it relates so much to the nature of the cosmos. The secular atheist believes that there really is no governing power, and Michael talks about how the Bible says there's actually a divine council, that there are, in effect, many gods, not that he's a polytheist. It's just that God created a heavenly host through which he rules the universe.
Well, just as an aside, we could probably do a whole program on it, but the last several years I've been getting into some of this material, but it seems to me that at one time, so many Christians were Bible-centered, which is really good, but they kind of ruled out demon possession. They kind of ruled out angels. They kind of ruled out healing and miracles even today. And now, as we get into this material, and there's so much of it going on, it says to me that what we read of in the New Testament, this is not, there are a lot of people who read the New Testament, well, I don't believe in the devil. I believe in God, yes. But as we look at this stuff, hey, I believe there are demon spirits. There's a lot. We were talking about portals. We're talking about stargates. We were talking about forbidden gates. So I think this should make all of us who think we've got all the answers, and sometimes, I get calls, I don't like that stuff you're getting into, it sound blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm sorry, but that's the universe we live in. And there's so much of it going on today.
That's really built into the title, Revising Reality.
Yeah.
That we're challenging Christians. We're saying to them, whether you're talking about new alternative understanding in physics, or you're talking about a Michael Heiser who's doing some great work in ancient texts and helping us to get new insights into ancient texts in the Bible, both of those are really shattering this sort of secular atheistic view of the cosmos that we were taught in schools and have been taught in television programs. And so Revising Reality is saying to Christians, you need to wake up. The reality that we are learning about today is very supernatural. And so there are so many things going on. The issue of fallen angels, the issue of the Nephilim, the issue of the divine council. It is a very different cosmos than what we were taught even just 10 to 20 years ago. So many new insights.
I think, as I look, Tom and Donna Howell and I have finished a book called Final Fire on revival. I believe I know revivals are happening at the present time, but it seems to me that as the church is awakened to what we're talking about, to the reality of that unseen world, that God is preparing us to be true prayer warriors, to really engage in spiritual warfare, to realize that our problems are not basically what we see, it's what we don't see. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, so on and so forth. And perhaps you and I, and programs like this, we are actually equipping the church to stand strong in the last days, because if we're going to stand strong, we have to know this material.
That is the spiritual impetus behind why we wrote this book. We believe we're moving into a very critical time where if you don't understand the nature of reality, you're not going to be in a position to do the spiritual warfare that is going to be required.
Well, getting back to that, we want to kind of just review a bit. We did speak about the hidden agenda of CERN, and you spoke very eloquently about that the ultimate objective of CERN concerns spirits and not just physics. You spoke about the fact that CERN quests to birth a new race of beings. This is actually what they're seeking to do. But there's a connection to Berkeley, our own lovely Berkeley. Tell us what the connection is.
Lawrence Livermore, the Berkeley accelerator. Yeah, accelerators, although CERN in Geneva, France, is this 27 kilometer, about 17-mile long ring for colliding particles. Particle acceleration has been done for quite some time. What most people don't realize is that there's a very strange connection between particle accelerators and DNA sequencing. In fact, the genome of the DNA of humanity was a project worked on at Berkeley, and this all begins to play together when one understands that scientists are actually using these technologies to literally do what we saw in Star Trek, the teleportation, to actually be able to teleport DNA sequences from one location to the other, to decompose and recompose creatures or entities or things, of course, through this kind of teleportation. And so it opens the door to some incredible possibilities, and in fact, things that we're seeing in genetics. The idea of creating chimeras or mixtures of creatures, hybrids. We talk about all those kinds of things in this book, and we point out the very sinister connection between particle accelerators, DNA sequencing, and the quest to build a new human race. All of these things are connected, and it is stunning when one begins to unlock the mysteries of what scientists are really attempting to accomplish.
Yeah, we seem to be, and I see it not just in talking to you or reading your book, but we seem to be on the edge of something that is absolutely demonic, absolutely sinister, where there is obviously a well-orchestrated plan to do everything possible to remove the testimony of Jesus Christ. I mean, you were talking before about them getting together and planning to shoot Jesus out of the sky as he comes
kill
back.
God.
To kill God. And not only is it a few crackpots, but it's well-known people who are highly credentialed. Now tell us about, well, let me read from physicists Michael Turner and Frank Wilczek. Quote, "Without warning, a bubble of true vacuum could nucleate somewhere in the universe and move outwards at the speed of light. And before we realize what swept by us, our protons would decay away." And that's about the strangelets. Tell us about those strangelets.
For 30 years or more, certain scientists have been criticizing the work at CERN at Geneva and expressing scientific reasons why what they're doing could literally destroy the universe. Even Stephen Hawking, who most of your listeners are familiar with, the great scientist that suffers from Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and is confined to a wheelchair, one of the smartest men in the world, and even he says that what they're doing they should not be doing, attempting to open portals to let potential entities come through these portals. It is stunning that scientists are talking about these things. The notion of strangelets, whenever particles are collided and they generate powers greater than 10 tera-electron volts, which is 10 trillion volts, which is what happens at CERN, they create these little particles called strangelets. Anthony Patch, this is his research. He's one of our authors and is really regarded as sort of the expert on the meaning of CERN from a Judeo-Christian perspective. But he talks about strangelets. Strangelets are little particles that are created by these massive, powerful collisions at CERN. Strangelets sink to the center of the Earth. They sink and they stabilize at the center of the Earth. They are known as the most explosive force in the universe. If you believe in the Big Bang, they were at the center of the Big Bang. Once enough strangelets accumulate at the center of the Earth could be transformed into a neutron star, which basically would be really bad for life on Earth. Some scientists say this could happen based upon what CERN is doing within 10 to 100 years. And so there are massive dangers that are going on there, not to mention the spiritual dangers CERN was built intentionally on top of the Temple of Apollo, the Greek and Roman god of destruction, supposedly an opening to the abyss. You think these scientists are purely doing these things coincidentally? No, there's a spiritual basis to what they're doing, and we talk about that.
Well, let's talk about Saturn, from Saturn to the abyss. This idea of Saturn containing a black cube at its center, and the idea of this cube being a phantom zone, the thought that maybe it's the place of imprisonment for fallen angels. What do you know about that?
There's all sorts of speculation. I was staggered as because I've studied the paranormal and the occult and the implications of that and the history of that in the United States. But in doing the research for this book, I was really stunned to learn that at the core of some of the most sinister and evil occult sects or secret societies, the occult, is a worship of Saturn. Saturnalia, of course, is the Roman holiday that is typically celebrated around the 27th of December, and that Christians are accused of merely adopting and taking the birth of Christ and placing it on top of that. But it turns out that the worship of Saturn has some enormous basis in history. It gets into concepts called the electric universe, into the possibility that the cosmos, our solar system, was quite different, perhaps as recently as 10,000 years ago, in which the sun, our sun, was not our sun at that time, but the sun was actually Saturn. And this is the basis of Saturn worship. Perhaps the most evil occult society was known as the Brotherhood of Saturn. It was a German occult society that actually gave birth to Aleister Crowley and to his Ordo Templi Orientis. Crowley, of course, was the famous English occultist that lived around lived in the 1910s to 1940s in that time frame. And the issue of Saturn is at the core of this. When one begins to go and look at this issue of the black cube, you find some startling things. The filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, who did a number of films, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Eyes Wide Shut, Clockwork Orange, he was obsessed with the fact that there was a world elite that at its core were Saturn worshipers. And his idea of the black monolith, those that saw 2001 and may remember the black monolith, well, this was the black cube. Curiously, Hollywood made him change the planet in the movie that Arthur C. Clarke originally had written about the black monolith associated with Saturn. Hollywood made him change it to Jupiter. Perhaps because they did not want to draw attention to the fact that Saturn is at the core of the occult cults. And so, remarkable. The black cube we see in dozens of movies. We see it pictured as statues all around the world. If you just were to go in and Google and just type in the black cube, you would be astonished at how many, in effect, you could say statues or you could say shrines there are built to the black cube. The black cube is a representation of the planet Saturn. For crying out loud, even the Islamic peoples circle the black cube in Mecca, the Kaaba, that is at the center of their worship. They travel around the black cube the way the rings of Saturn travel around Saturn. There is a core Saturn worship at the foundation of many religions. It is absolutely stunning, and it's related to CERN.
Well, Douglas, do you think everyone in the intelligence world knows about Saturn and the black cube? I mean,
according to some, they do. According to those that truly read into what's really going on, supposedly they do. I haven't personally yet seen the documents. I haven't had the evidence presented to me, literally, so I could review it directly. But the rumor is that, yes, that it's a well-known phenomenon, and there is no question that the cult of the black cube, the cult of Saturn, is at the core of some of the darkest, most sinister, satanic religions of this world.
Well, you also, in fact, you use it at the bottom of the pages, every page in your book. It's called the Birkeland Current. And then I wonder what the possibility is of the DNA, perhaps, of fallen angels being unlocked by the Birkeland current. First of all, tell us what the Birkeland current is, and then relate that.
Well, the Birkeland current, the currents that can transfer between planets, between stars, between various objects, it gets into the whole issue of Einstein. One of the things we talk about is the challenge between Einstein and Nikola Tesla, and the fact that the current standard model of physics is based upon Einsteinian points of view. We actually look at, and this is one of the parts of the, why we said revising reality, is that many scientists, there's a project called the Thunderbolts Project, and they believe in a thing called the electric universe. They believe, in contrast to Einstein, that gravity is not the central power in the universe, but electromagnetism is the power in the universe. And the Birkeland current, what is fascinating about it is that this is a spiral DNA-like current that can exist between heavenly bodies, and in fact probably is the source for many of the markings we see. For instance, Valles Marineris, which is this giant trench on the planet Mars, looks like it was formed by an electrical discharge. As one studies archaeology, the pictographs that are inscribed on caves all around the world, one sees consistent patterns in what these perhaps they were Neanderthals, we don't know, were drawing these pictures on cave walls all over the world, and they were seeing the same odd kinds of configurations that, interestingly, are the way that electrical discharges actually look when they're created in the laboratory. The speculation is that at one time the solar system was displaying these electrical currents, a little bit like the aurora borealis, between planets. And so the Birkeland current is, in effect, the propagation of these discharges across vast areas of space. And as we don't have time to talk about it, but the normal view, the standard model, is that space is a vacuum. There's nothing there. The electric universe believes that that's not true, that there is an ether, and that ether is composed of ionized gas known as plasma, which is, in fact, the fourth state of matter. So we know about liquids, and we know about solids, and we know about gases. Most people don't realize there's a fourth state of matter called plasma. And the electric universe, the scientists, and these are scientists that study this, they oppose the Einsteinian view. They basically support the Tesla view. And so it's a radical transformation of science. And again, this is sort of one of the aspects of what we mean by revising reality, is that this is a more spiritual understanding of the cosmos, and it may well help reinforce the truths of the Bible. And so it's why it's so intriguing to us.
I think it really does. I don't see any of this as being anti-Bible. I think for those of us who believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and we're indwelt by the Holy Spirit and we have the hope of eternal life, we're looking for the trumpet to sound and the dead to rise in Christ. I think this is very exciting. Now, we don't have time to get into it, but some of the issues that, and I'm letting our listeners know because they'll want to get the book, but some of the issues that the book develops deals with the question, will CERN's currents become the key that unlocks the abyss? If you've been following in our conversation, you will see how that is a natural question. And then the question of the Scorpion King. Will he be sprung from his imprisonment? Now, we certainly don't have time to get into that either, but you will get all of that and much more in this amazing book, Revising Reality. And we do thank Douglas Woodward for being with us.